Hello and welcome everyone to Coach Connect Live. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Eloise Aone, and I am the Director of Coach Connect at the Muse Group. And for those of you who don't know what Coach Connect is, it is Fairygodboss and the Muse's career coaching platform. So essentially, it's the place where you can come and find a coach to work with one-on-one on anything career related, whether you are looking to make a career change, actively in a job search, or happy in your career but looking for growth. It's the best place to come to find that one-on-one support. And every month, I am joined here by one of our top tier coaches to talk about a subject that is relevant to you about your career, about taking those next steps. And today I am thrilled to be joined by Jenn Smith. Thank you so much for joining us, Jenn.
Thanks for having me, Eloise.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about interviewing, right? So specifically, the mistakes that you see people make when they are preparing for and going into these interviews. So really excited to talk about this. I think it's going to be incredibly relevant to so many of us. We all will be interviewing at some point down the line in our careers, however soon or long term. And so before we jump into that topic, I'd love to give you a chance to introduce yourself to our audience today so they can get a sense of your areas of expertise and what it might be like to work with you.
Yes, thank you. And hello, everyone. My name is Jenn Smith, and I love helping career-minded professionals navigate this ever-changing world of work. So my background, I have over 15 years of experience in human resources and talent acquisition leadership across a couple different industries and Fortune 200 companies. So I started my career in PepsiCo. I actually started in operations and then moved into human resources. Spent about 8 years there. And then I moved over into tech distribution with a company called Ingram Micro. And I finished my corporate career in biotech at Thermo Fisher Scientific. And through all of those years in HR, I've had the opportunity to recruit, hire, and interview thousands of professionals across industries and functions. And I was thinking about this. In fact, my first assignment in HR was actually recruiting and hiring for our frontline supervisor positions, which was years and years ago, but I still remember it just like it was yesterday practically. So that experience carried out through my career throughout the year. So I've orchestrated hiring events and job fairs and recruited leaders for multiple leadership teams and spent a ton of time on college campuses nationwide recruiting, hiring students and recent grads. So needless to say, this work is in my blood. And so now as a career coach, I just love sharing all of that insider knowledge to help professionals like the folks here today land jobs that they love. And I joined the Muse back in 2018. So it's been a few years at this point, and I feel really lucky to be part of that platform with the Muse and Fairygodboss. And I also have my own practice at Flourish Career. So thanks again for having me today. And I'm excited to dive into all things interview prep.
Yeah, awesome. So a true expert here, everyone. Jenn is just full of insights from her career and from working in HR and really being on both sides of that table. So when I talk to people who are looking for work or preparing for interviews, they often say it's kind of that scariest part of the search of that process. And a lot of people say that, I guess I see the frustration happen because the skill sets that you need to interview well and the approaches that you need to take to interview well might not align with the skill sets that you need to actually do the job well. So there's this disconnect, right? And it takes a true skill set and a true strategic approach to be good at interviewing. And so I'd be really curious to hear, what are the big mistakes that you see us making when we are interviewing? And then can we dive into some solutions so that we can overcome those and make sure that we don't make them moving forward?
Yes, and thank you for setting that up so nicely. So what I wanted to do here is to share those 3 mistakes that I've seen over and over, and this is across all levels. So these are kind of the most common things that I think are very practical and tactical to help us mitigate. And then we're going to go through a framework to help you mitigate these 3 mistakes. So I'm going to spell out these 3 mistakes right now. So common mistake number 1 is providing generic responses versus telling stories. We're going to talk about that a little in more detail in a second. Common mistake number 2 is not having energy or showcasing enthusiasm for the job. And a lot of times that comes with nerves, and we totally get it. You're going to be nervous during an interview, but there are ways to let your personality shine through. And then common mistake number 3 is not asking good questions. And we're going to talk about that in detail. That's probably the easiest one, quite frankly, to mitigate, is preparing good questions. But I want to explain what I mean by good questions. So the theme with these 3 common interview mistakes is really to infuse the conversation with your unique essence. So you want to be engaged in the conversation, share interesting stories, and show curiosity about the team that you're about to join. So one of the things that I love doing when I work with job seekers, especially on interview prep, is having you kind of put yourself in the interviewer's shoes or the interviewer team shoes. So if you can, tell us in the chat, have you ever worked on a team that was understaffed? So I'm guessing that we're going to hear from a lot of people that they've worked on a team that was understaffed. And so yes, I have. Yeah, Eloise, you definitely have. And so when you work on a team that is understaffed, how does that feel? So there's stress, there's overtime probably that has to get done. You kind of feel like you can't get ahead. Yeah. So we're getting, oh yes. So people have this weight for constantly striving to meet deadlines and putting in the extra hours just to keep up. And it's really hard. So the idea here is when you're interviewing, you're filling a gap on that team. They want you to step in and help them, help alleviate that workload. So a lot of times we get nervous because it's like this performance and the spotlight's on us. But sometimes when we reframe our mindset thinking like, oh, I'm going to go in and help this team and alleviate some of that workload, it can be really helpful in terms of our mindset. So let's talk a little bit about this framework that I want to share with you. And hopefully it's easy for you to remember and you can take this with you when you go into your next interview. So the framework I want to share is called the PREP framework. So we're prepping for interviews and we have a PREP framework. So it's P is personalized stories. R is radiating energy or enthusiasm. E is engaging with good questions. And P is practice, practice, practice. So that's the framework to have in mind as you're preparing for your interviews. So let's talk about the personalized stories. And I know, Eloise, you work with your clients and coming up with stories as well. And I think this is one of the number 1 things that folks do for interview prep. So the idea here is that we want to tell stories. You want to paint the picture with your responses. So storytelling is 22% more memorable than just stating facts. So people want to bring people through the story with you. It's going to invite that connection and invite conversation. And I know that there are a lot of ways to prep our stories. There's star stories, there's car stories. I personally like the OAR framework, probably because I like the band OAR, but it's objective. So you're setting the stage for the story, then the actions that you did, and then the results. So you want to wrap it up in a bow by sharing the results. So this is just like a story, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's the idea here. So I'm going to give you a quick example. And this is kind of a basic interview question that I know a lot of interviewers like to ask, but I want to show you the difference between that generic response and the story response. So let's say you get asked the question, what is your greatest strength? Which is, again, a very typical question. A generic response would be, my greatest strength is my attention to detail. Okay, great. A story, an OAR story response might look something like this. So let's say in my previous role as a quality assurance analyst, we had a critical project that required ensuring our product met strict quality standards. And this was before the release. We were launching a new product. Now move into the actions. I led the effort by meticulously reviewing every single line of code. I developed comprehensive test cases and conducted thorough testing. We paid so much close attention to every single detail. And then the result. As a result, my detailed approach and my attention to details, we identified and resolved several critical issues before the release. This prevented customer complaints and helped us save significant money so we didn't have to go back and redo anything. So you can see the difference there between the generic response and the story response. Now, as somebody that's listening to that story, they're taking that in. They're walking right through that situation with you. And then they can take that and apply it to the job that they're interviewing you for. So a lot of times we're in our heads, we've been through these stories, but the person listening to us hasn't. So you want to spell it out with that OAR framework.
I love this. Jenn, I'm just going to jump in. Yeah, I think it's so powerful, right? The difference between those two that you just shared with us. The first one, I almost kind of forget. I almost don't believe you, right? Despite myself, even if I want to believe you, because I have nothing to hold on to. Whereas in the story, what I love about the framework that you just shared is that you start off the story with a clear need or problem that required you to step in and take actions, right? And that kind of purposeful storytelling is so wonderful because it has that forward movement, and it showcases that you were needed, and it also showcases how you did things well versus just telling me what you did well.
Yes, the how. That's the important piece, is the how. And so, that's what they want to know. And they want to put that in context to the job that they're hiring you for. So I love when you said purposeful storytelling, and you want to be intentional about this. And that actually brings me to another point. A lot of times, I work with folks and they say, well, how do I figure out these stories? Like, how do I do that in an interview? It's hard to kind of think about that. And the idea is that before the interview, think about what you want the interviewers to know about you. So based on the job you're interviewing for, what are the things you want them to know? And then go ahead and craft your stories, craft 5 or 7 or even 10 stories ahead of time. And then you can use those stories pretty much based on every single question they're going to ask you, is my guess. So that's
I love that.
A good way to prep ahead of time. And then I've even had folks, put, like, if you're doing a virtual interview, put Post-it notes like around your computer with your stories on them. So then it helps with the nerves a little bit as well. So
yeah, I love that. And that's linked to purpose again, right? And the way that I think about this is come in with an agenda, right? Like as if you were going to a meeting, this is what you're saying, right, Jenn? It's like, know what you want them to understand about you and help that be super clear on that with that agenda items of, here are the things that I want to discuss. And then use that to infuse your answers. And it's so much more activated and really brings down that tension for yourself, those nerves that you might feel, because you're much more in control of the conversation as a result.
Exactly. Have an agenda. I love that. I'm going to use that. Thank you, Eloise.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving to common mistake number 2 is lacking energy or not showcasing enthusiasm for the job. And I know that this happens because of nerves and everything else, but my friends, your energy is contagious. So employers want to see that you're genuinely excited about joining the team, and that you're excited about the opportunity they have to offer. So body language, tone, gratitude, curiosity, all of these things are going to help bring energy to the conversation. Now, I want to say that this isn't about being somebody you're not. I don't want anybody to be fake or anything like that. It's really about bringing a sense of interest to the conversation. And one of the things I think about with this is, if you think about somebody learning a musical instrument or playing a musical instrument, and this is top of mind because our neighbor's son is learning to play the violin and we get to hear this, but you think about like somebody that's playing a violin that's very mechanical, like they're thinking about which notes to hit and it's very mechanical. You can see they're thinking, versus somebody that's their heart and their soul is into the song and you can like feel that coming through. And that's the difference here. So we want you to generate some energy and some enthusiasm for the job, and simple things like tone, confidence, posture, eye contact, smiling, those simple things can help you bring that energy to the conversation. And then we have common interview mistake number 3 is not asking good questions. And the idea here is to engage with good questions. I will tell you that during interviews, it is such a letdown as a recruiter or a hiring manager when you save time at the end of like usually a very short conversation. You save 5 minutes in a half-hour conversation and the person says they don't have any questions. It just makes you feel like they're not interested. So the idea here is that you really want to think about, so have your agenda. What do you want to know about the company or the person that you're interviewing with? Write all of your questions down. It's okay to have notes with you. Bring them with you and make sure you get those questions answered. Now, I will tell you in debrief meetings, so after we do interviews with folks, all the hiring managers get together and they talk about what they heard. 9 times out of 10, people are talking about, did this person ask good questions? And it will really elevate you as a candidate if you're asking good questions. Now, I want to mention, what do I mean by good questions? So good questions. Good questions to me, like there's kind of a rule that I have here is anything that you can't Google about the company. So if you can Google it, it's not a good question. So we want to know like a peek under the tent of what it's like to work there. And the idea here is this is going to help you get a better understanding of what it's like to work there. And it will help you evaluate whether or not you're actually going to like working there, because you're not just in this to be in this. Like you should be evaluating them as much as they're evaluating you. And so think about what you want to know and then figure out those questions. If you get stuck, I always recommend whatever the role is of the person you're interviewing with. So if you're interviewing with HR, ask an HR related question. I remember somebody, I was working in HR and I was interviewing someone and they asked me about the retention strategy. So like, how do we retain talent? And I thought that was a really good question for somebody to ask an HR leader. So if you're interviewing with your future boss, ask about their leadership philosophy. So you can't go wrong with asking a question related to the person's job that you're interviewing with. Does anyone, and maybe I'd be interested in the chat too, if you guys want to add in the chat any of your go-to questions, maybe we can kind of come up with a pool here for folks to take with them. If you have any go-to questions that you ask, maybe throw those in the chat and folks can pick those up. I do want to mention one other piece around the culture question. So one of kind of the I guess I'm going to call this a boring question that we get all the time is like, what's the culture like? What I would recommend there is that's kind of a generic question and it could be anything. So think about what you want to know about the culture and ask that question. So if you want to know, what makes you proud to work here, or were there any surprises when you first started? So questions like that will give you a peek under the tent of what it's like to work there. And again, can help you evaluate whether or not the company is going to be a fit for you.
Yeah, I love this, Jen. And so what I'm hearing is be specific in what you're trying to understand, because if you stay really general, you're gonna get a general answer, or you're not gonna actually start a conversation. And I want to go back to how you first started today's conversation with me. You were saying you were calling the interview a conversation. And I think that that's something that we forget when we go in, where we kind of go back to being good school children. I mean, I've seen the fiercest leaders, become very lack proactivity, not really drive the conversation forward, because they forget that it's a conversation when they go into an interview. And so I just love this parallel between calling the interview just a conversation, and then also thinking about what are the questions that I can ask that are actually specific enough to start a conversation and to spark conversational tones from the people I'm speaking to. So just wanted to throw that out there because I think that we forget that these questions at the end are really to start a conversation in the end.
That's exactly right. I love that you brought that up. And I always tell people that my favorite interviews are conversations. They turn into a two-way conversation where the person that I'm talking to is just as excited about the role as I am, about filling the role and for that person to come on the team and close the gap and join us in our mission. So thank you for bringing that up. And we have tons of good questions coming through the chat. So if you have your notebook and pen, grab a couple of those, because these are all really, really good questions for you to take with you on your next interview.
Yeah, fabulous hive mind here. I love it. And Jen, we've had a bunch of questions come in for you as well as we've been discussing this. So let me just kind of go back and see if we'll try to answer as many as we can in the next 10 minutes. Let me see. So April said, we were talking, I believe, about uh, crafting an agenda and knowing the stories that we want to share. And she says, however, what if they throw a curveball question that might not necessarily align with the story or answer that you've prepared? How do you suggest to April and everyone else here that they approach this kind of situation in the interview?
Yeah. So the idea here is just take a moment. So take a moment, gather your thoughts, think about the response that you want to share, and go back again. Like maybe you even have a couple bullets with you that says, these are the top 3 things I want this person to know about me. How can I share, based on the question they asked me, how can I share one of these top 3 things that I want them to know? Maybe it doesn't fit into one of the stories that I crafted already, but here's the 3 things I want them to know. And how can I use that as a guideline for my response?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, I was just going to say, don't hesitate to just take a minute. It's okay. You can take a breath. You can ask hey, just give me a minute for that. It's totally okay to do that, to gather your thoughts before you respond.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, that pause, that space is really scary to a lot of people. But I always say, you're looking thoughtful. You're
Yes.
looking like someone who is not just throwing out answers because she's prepared them, but
Right.
you're looking like someone who's actually thoughtfully listening to the question and taking the time needed to give a thoughtful response. So I think to your point, Jen, just take your time, and it actually can pay off in the end, because you're getting that time you need, but you're also coming off as that thoughtful thought partner and contributor to the conversation.
Yes.
Let's see here. Anna asks, as an introvert, it feels incredibly difficult and disingenuous to be extroverted and energetic in interviews, especially when you've submitted so many applications. I feel you, Anna. What suggestions do you have? We have a few questions here that's come in. Raven also asked a similar question about feeling kind of awkward in those moments and not necessarily genuine when you show up. What advice do you have there?
Yeah, that can be tricky. And I will say, my fellow introverts, I am 100% introverted as well. So I totally get it. And this isn't about being someone that you're not or turning into an extrovert in an interview. It's really more about interest. So you just want to showcase that you're interested, that you're curious. So one of the things you can do is ask questions. So even after you respond to a story, say you tell a story, then ask a question. So after that, or ask if they need more information. So you're really just showcasing and having that conversation with somebody versus feeling like the spotlight is on you and they've got their tally sheet and they're evaluating you. So it's more about turning that into a conversation, into something that you're comfortable with as well. So sometimes that can help. And again, I don't want that to come off as it being somebody that you're not. It's really just about being interested, being curious, and showcasing a little bit of energy for the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's something else that, to Raven's question about feeling self-conscious, these video interviews are so weird, right? We're looking at our self-interview, right? So do yourself a favor, just turn off your camera if looking at yourself feels awkward or reminds you that you are feeling awkward. So there are things that you can do, essentially set yourself up for success and do the things that you need to do so that you feel successful in the interview. It can be helpful here as well. Yeah. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Let me see. There's so many questions. I'm just parsing through them. How do you pose yourself as the solution to overwork without coming across like you're ready to take over on day one, right? So Stephanie's asking, I think the question here really is, how do you showcase that you're ready to jump in without feeling overbearing or without giving the impression that you're going to just take everything over and maybe not adapt to the culture and to the specific needs of a company or a team?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. You might even ask hey, what does your onboarding process look like? Or, what is the expectation or the timeline for me to be up to speed? Is this the type of a role where I'll be expected to hit the ground running on day one? Or is there a 30, 60, 90-day onboarding process where I'll get to learn about the people and the process and how things work here? So I think asking a couple of those questions just to get clarity around the culture will help you understand what the expectations are. And then you can kind of tailor your onboarding approach from there.
Yeah, nice. A few other questions before we close out today. One question from Sarah, and I think that we can respond to this beyond her specific question here too. She says, how do you address a medical leave and resume gap of 9 to 12 months?
Yeah, honestly, so I get this question a lot, and I think this is more a mindset shift for you as an interviewee, I guess, because to me, everyone has life stories. And so and long gone are the days where we go from one job to the next and, or we're in a job for 30 years. Like life happens and that's okay. So I always approach this like everyone has a story to share, and so maybe you share what you learned about yourself during this career break, or maybe you just took a career break because you want to take a career break and there's a cool story that comes from travel. I remember I interviewed a gentleman who took, I don't know, it was over a year. I didn't even ask about the gap. He brought it up, and he had traveled to the southernmost point in the United States and the northernmost point in the United States, and he just wanted a breather. And it was such a cool story to the point that I remember it today. Clearly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's more, organizations are okay with breaks and gaps, and they understand that life happens. And it's more about what is the story you're going to share and what do you bring to the table, and focusing on that.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it really comes with that confidence, right? With
Yeah,
deciding what that narrative is going to be for you. And to the question, when it's about medical leave, perhaps that's too personal and you don't want to tell a story about that. And that's okay too, right, Jen? Like just saying,
absolutely. Yeah,
I took this time off and now and just like shifting the conversation back towards what you're going to do for them and what you're capable of bringing to the table.
absolutely. You get to curate your career story. So I tell this to folks all the time, especially even with resumes. Like you get to curate what the story is for the reader on a resume. You get to curate what the story is for somebody that's interviewing you. This is your story to tell, and you can share that how you want to.
Yeah, that's great. And our last, the last question that I think we have time for is Raven asks, is there a workbook or a worksheet to guide us to understanding better what we offer, how to understand our strengths and weaknesses, et cetera? Basically, how to prepare for an interview. And yes, there is, in fact. You might see in the chat that Jen is very generously sharing, and maybe you could speak about it more, Jen, but a process that you can download and have to
Yeah.
keep working.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good call. So yes, I have an interview essentials. This is hot off the press. It's curated tools and resources. So a couple audio lessons on there around interview prep. There's a downloadable resource and a blog post. So 5-ish or 6 resources within that landing page. So if you grab that link there, you can download that and you'll have access to everything.
Yeah, wonderful. And so that's in the chat, but if you can't find it in there, no worries. You're also going to get an email after today with the recording of this session and with the link to to those resources. So look out for that in your inbox. I'll also like to add that we are currently in celebration of the new offering on Fairygodboss of Coach Connect services. We're offering 10% off right now with the code LAUNCH. So any service with Jen, any service on Coach Connect is 10% off for the next week and a half. So check that out as well. Code LAUNCH, LAUNCH, all caps, will get you 10% off all services. So hopefully that gives you incentive to check out services with Jen. And you can work with Jen on so many things, whether it's interviewing or finding her clarity, or building the steps that you need in a job search or in your career. So do check those out. Jen, thank you so much for your time today. It is such a valuable experience for all of us. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Eloise, and thanks everyone for being here with us.
Yeah, everyone, see you next month for our next iteration of Coach Connect Live. Check out Jen on Fairygodboss and the Muse, and we will talk to you all soon. Have a good one.
Thank you.